Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. I am Joe, I'm the host. Thank you for joining today. And if you're like me, the allergy season is really getting ramped up and your sinus cavity is being held together with thoughts and prayers. So we're just doing the best we can at this point. How does it feel if you don't have allergy problems? How does it feel to be God's favorites? That's what I'd like to know. I don't know what I've done to deserve this in my life, but I'd like to apologize for it. By some miracle, I sound okay right now, but a little while ago, I didn't, in the worst way. It was to the point where I thought, I'm just going to skip this episode because I can't talk right. You can understand what I'm saying, but it sounds like, you shouldn't be saying things to people. That's the way I sounded, and a lot of sniffles and, the whole 9 yards. But I sound fine now. I feel great, sound fine. And it's going to go downhill after this. So, like I said, thoughts and prayers for my sinuses. If this is your first time listening to 10-Minute Murder, please subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any new ones. Connect with me on social media. See the visuals that go along with what we're talking about in the podcast. And if you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple or any place that's possible. Your positive feedback is appreciated and very helpful. Go to 10minutemurder.com for all things 10-Minute Murder. Now to today's story. In many family annihilation cases, the perpetrator is the parent, often the father. Potential motives vary from a discovered affair to a vicious custody battle or threat of divorce. These cases often end with the tragic deaths of everybody involved, including the suicide of the perpetrator. For every rule, there's an exception, and the Browning family murders didn't follow any of these patterns. To begin with, the Browning family didn't seem to have any of the turmoil that can lead to a family annihilation. John W. Browning, the family's father, was a successful attorney who had been happily married to his wife Tamara for years. They had their first child, Nicholas, in February 1992, and later had two more sons, Benjamin and Gregory. Despite his job keeping him busy, John made an effort to stay involved in both of his sons' lives and the local community as well. He was committed to his role as a leader in the local church and volunteered as a scoutmaster, hosting Boy Scouts family meetings and helping to lead outdoor expeditions for the troops. John and Tamara were rightfully proud of their sons. They had raised intelligent, kind boys who were involved in sports and had a wide circle of friends and did well in schools. Nicholas, their oldest, was a Boy Scout, but he was working toward his goal of becoming an Eagle Scout. He was an honors student at his high school, a well-rounded, trustworthy kid. It was 1 week before Nicholas's 16th birthday. He'd made plans to stay over at a friend's house that night, but he suddenly decided to leave the sleepover and return to his family home in the middle of the night. It was late in the evening of February 1st, 2008, and the rest of Nicholas's family were already asleep. Nicholas crept through the house and found what he was looking for, one of John's handguns. Armed with this weapon, Nicholas located each of the members of his family. Without hesitation, he shot them, one by one. There were no signs of a struggle. In fact, his parents and brothers likely had no idea that they were even attacked. Even if they had woken up and tried to run, there was no escape. Once he was satisfied that his family had been executed, Nicholas left the house. He disposed of the gun by throwing it into some nearby bushes, hiding it from view. Then the 15-year-old returned to his friend's house and resumed his sleepover as if nothing was wrong. The next day, Nicholas was dropped back home by one of his friends. Even though he knew that the 4 dead bodies waited for him inside, he kept up this act, pretending that everything was fine. Nicholas knew that he had to stage a scene where he discovered the bodies for the first time, so that nobody would become suspicious. He'd rehearsed exactly what he was going to do. He'd walk inside the house, pretend to discover his father's body, the only corpse which was downstairs, and then call the police. The plan went off without a hitch, and Nicholas placed his 911 call, telling the operator that he found his father lying motionless on the couch, not breathing, with blood coming out of his nose. He said nothing about the bodies that were upstairs, and the responders sent to the scene believed that they were arriving at the scene of some tragic cardiac arrest, with no idea about the horrors that waited for them inside the rest of the house. Emergency responders rushed to the Browning house and discovered the extent of the violence, as well as the body of 45-year-old John Browning on the downstairs couch, the bedrooms upstairs containing the bodies of 44-year-old Tamara Browning, 13-year-old Gregory, and 11-year-old Benjamin. Searching the property, police located the discarded handgun in the bushes outside. On Sunday evening, one day after the murders, a candlelight vigil was held outside of the Browning family home. The community was scared and also in shock. Francis Daly, the pastor of the local church, expressed his disbelief, saying, quote, "I'm told this is not the kind of family this could happen to." And he was right. John and Tamara adored each other and had a stable marriage. The whole family was involved in the Boy Scouts and spent a lot of time exploring the outdoors together. But they had all been murdered in their beds, except for one. Immediately, investigators' suspicion turned to the one surviving member of the Browning family. Nicholas's story would never have held up under scrutiny. The evidence was everywhere. Despite his attempts to hide the gun and pretend that he'd been at his friend's house when the family was killed, it was sloppily planned and poorly executed. In other words, exactly the kind of murder that a 15-year-old boy could be expected to carry out. As it turned out, there was no need to pick at the holes in the story to coax a confession out of Nicholas. In the early hours of that Sunday morning, less than 12 hours after the bodies of his family were discovered, Nicholas Browning confessed to all 4 murders. The resulting news release did not provide many answers for the grieving community, who were left wondering why the teenage boy they considered to be a friend and neighbor had violently ended the lives of his entire family. In fact, the news release left locals with more questions than answers. It simply stated that no signs of a confrontation had been found at the Browning family home and revealed that Nicholas and John had been in conflict recently. The cause of the conflict, how serious it was left up to speculation. Liz Laslabach, a 17-year-old schoolmate of Nicholas's, remembered hearing him complain about arguing with his dad. However, she was certain that the fight had not been serious, and Nicholas had certainly never implied that any kind of violent altercation had taken place. Like the rest of Nicholas, Gregory, and Benjamin's classmates, Liz was devastated. They'd lost 2 of their peers in a matter of hours, and a kid their own age had been the killer. It was a kind of trauma that must have been almost impossible to process. Nicholas was held at the juvenile detention of the Baltimore County Detention Center after being arrested for the murders and denied bail. Nobody quite knew what to do with him. This tall, gangly teenage boy who had committed such a horrific crime, and naively believed that he could somehow get away with it. Thinking that he could escape prosecution was just the beginning of Nicholas's naivety. Nicholas might have mistakenly believed that his young age would provide some type of leniency in his sentencing. For a single murder, maybe it would have, but this was a child who had deliberately annihilated an entire family, including 2 children, his siblings. It was a unique case, and it required a unique approach from prosecutors. It came as a shock to many, and possibly to Nicholas himself, when the charges were revealed. Despite his young age, he was going to be charged as an adult for all 4 counts of murder. His age only provided one advantage. He could not be given the death penalty. The motive for the killings remains hazy. Nicholas insisted that he had killed his father due to the abuse he suffered at John's hands. However, even if this argument was true, it didn't provide any explanation about the murders of Tamara, Gregory, and Benjamin. The prosecution believed that there was no truth to this version of events. Instead, prosecutors alleged that Nicholas had killed his parents in a fit of rage because he resented being told what to do. The murders of his brothers had been sort of an insurance policy, guaranteeing that the inheritance money would go all to Nicholas. How Nicholas expected to get away with such a sloppily planned murder in order to collect the inheritance in the first place is also a mystery. In January of 2009, Nicholas Browning reached a plea agreement with the prosecutors, pleading guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder. He received his sentence, 4 life terms in prison, with the first 2 of these terms being served consecutively. Currently, Nicholas is imprisoned at the Western Correctional Institution. His request for a reduced sentence was denied in 2014, but his release might be quicker than a 4 life-term sentence suggests. If his good behavior continues in prison, Nicholas will be eligible for parole in 2031, only 23 years into his sentence. That's less than 6 years total jail time for each murder.